What happens when the Duchess of Sussex walks into what she thinks will be a friendly morning chat show, only to find herself facing the most brutal takedown on live television? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Lorraine Kelly and discovers that not everyone is willing to play her victim narrative game. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Lorraine started like any other morning show appearance. The studio was buzzing with its usual energy, cameras positioned perfectly, and the familiar orange and blue set gleaming under the studio lights. But what transpired over the next 30 minutes would go down as one of the most explosive confrontations in British television history. Meghan Markle had arrived at the ITV studios with her usual entourage, expecting what her team had arranged as a supportive platform to discuss her latest ventures. The Duchess, dressed in an expensive cream-colored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, glided onto the set with that practiced smile we've all become so familiar with. Her publicist had briefed her that this would be a safe space, a chance to control the narrative once again. Lorraine Kelly, however, had other plans. The Scottish presenter, known for her warm demeanor and usually gentle approach with guests, had clearly done her homework. As Meghan settled into the iconic interview chair, adjusting her posture with that rehearsed elegance, there was something different in Lorraine's eyes. Something that suggested this wasn't going to be another softball interview where difficult questions were carefully avoided. "Meghan, lovely to have you here," Lorraine began, her tone pleasant, but notably lacking the usual effusive warmth she reserves for guests she genuinely admires. "I have to say, you look wonderful. Though I imagine it must be exhausting constantly having to present this perfect image to the world." The comment hung in the air for just a moment too long. Meghan's smile faltered almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. That tiny crack in the facade. That would prove to be the first domino in what was about to unfold. "Thank you, Lorraine," Meghan replied, her voice carrying that slight American lilt that somehow always sounds calculated when she's being interviewed. "I think it's important to show up authentically, which is something I've always tried to do, even when faced with incredible challenges and, frankly, unprecedented attacks from certain quarters." And there it was, less than 2 minutes into the interview, and Meghan had already pivoted to her favorite topic, herself as the victim. But Lorraine wasn't having it. "Attacks?" Lorraine repeated, tilting her head slightly. "That's interesting language, Meghan, because I've been looking at some of your recent statements, and I have to wonder if you truly understand how your words affect real people. People who don't have the luxury of multi-million-dollar deals and security teams." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's media-trained instincts kicked in, and she attempted to deflect with one of her practiced responses about speaking truth to power and using her platform responsibly. But Lorraine was ready for this. "Let me stop you there," Lorraine interjected, her Scottish accent becoming slightly more pronounced as her irritation began to show. "Because I think we need to address something directly. You've made some pretty serious allegations about racism within the royal family. Allegations that have caused genuine hurt to people I know personally. Yet when pressed for specifics, for actual evidence, you and your representatives always seem to dodge behind lawyers and carefully worded statements." Meghan's composure began to slip. The practiced smile became more strained, and her hands, which had been resting gracefully in her lap, began to fidget with her expensive jewelry. "I think what you're failing to understand, Lorraine," Meghan said, her voice taking on a condescending tone that viewers would immediately pick up on, "is that my lived experience as a woman of color in that institution speaks for itself. I don't need to provide you with a detailed breakdown of every microaggression, every instance of prejudice, for it to be valid." "Lived experience," Lorraine repeated, her eyebrows raised. "Right. So we're just supposed to take your word for it then? No questions asked? No consideration for the other people involved who might have a different perspective on these events?" The studio audience, which had been quietly observing this exchange, began to sense the brewing tension. You could practically hear the collective intake of breath as viewers realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan leaned forward slightly, her media training warring with what appeared to be genuine annoyance. "I find it quite telling, Lorraine, that you're more concerned with protecting an institution that has shown time and again that it values tradition over truth, than you are with supporting someone who has been brave enough to speak out against injustice. That last word, injustice, was delivered with such dramatic emphasis that it bordered on parody. But Lorraine wasn't laughing. Brave? Lorraine's voice rose slightly, her Scottish sensibilities clearly offended. You think it's brave to make explosive allegations on international television and then refuse to engage with any follow-up questions? You think it's brave to attack a family that can't defend themselves while you profit from the very titles they gave you? The gloves were officially off now, and what happened next would leave viewers absolutely stunned. Meghan's face underwent a transformation that was nothing short of remarkable. The carefully crafted mask of composure that she'd worn throughout countless interviews finally slipped completely. Her eyes narrowed, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a venom that few had ever heard from the supposedly gracious Duchess. "How dare you?" she hissed, leaning forward in her chair with an intensity that made the cameramen zoom in instinctively. "How fucking dare you sit there and question my truth? You have absolutely no idea what it's like to walk into a room and be the only person who looks like me, to have people whisper behind your back about whether you belong there." The F-bomb dropped on live morning television sent shockwaves through the studio. Production assistants frantically gestured to the control room, but Lorraine held up a hand, signaling them to keep rolling. This was television gold, and she knew it. "Oh, here we go again," Lorraine shot back, her Scottish fire now fully ignited. "The only person who looks like you, Meghan? You're half white. You grew up in bloody Hollywood with privileges most people can only dream of. You attended private schools, you had a successful acting career, and you married into one of the wealthiest families on the planet. So forgive me if I don't immediately reach for the tissues when you paint yourself as some kind of oppressed victim." The studio fell into absolute silence. Even the usually bustling crew stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented verbal warfare unfold. Meghan's mouth fell open in shock, clearly not expecting Lorraine to fight back with such brutal honesty. "You know what your problem is, Meghan," Lorraine continued, her voice rising with each word. "You thought you could walk in here, spout your rehearsed talking points about racism and mental health, and I'd just nod along like every other interviewer who's too scared of being cancelled to ask you the hard questions. Well, I've got news for you, love. I'm not Oprah, and this isn't America." Meghan's hands were visibly shaking now. Whether from anger or shock was impossible to tell. "You're unbelievable," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You're sitting there minimizing racism because what, you're uncomfortable with the conversation? This is exactly the kind of response that forces people like me to stay silent about our experiences." "People like you?" Lorraine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean millionaires who make a living from playing the victim card? Because that's what this is, isn't it, Meghan? Your entire brand is built on being the wronged party, the misunderstood princess who was too good for the nasty old royal family." The color drained from Meghan's face, replaced by a red flush of fury that was climbing up her neck. "You clearly have no understanding of the complexities of—" "Oh, fuck off with the complexities," Lorraine interrupted, her Scottish accent thickening with anger. "Let me tell you what I understand. I understand that you've made millions trading on your royal connections while simultaneously trashing the very people who gave you those connections. I understand that you've weaponized serious issues like mental health and racism to deflect from any criticism of your behavior. And I understand that you're sitting in my studio right now, expecting me to give you another platform to spread your poison without any pushback whatsoever." The audience was completely captivated, phones out recording every second of this explosive confrontation. This was the kind of television moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a harsh screech that seemed to punctuate the moment. "I don't have to listen to this shit," she declared, her voice now completely devoid of the refined accent she usually employed. "This is harassment, pure and simple." "Harassment?" Lorraine remained seated, but her voice carried the authority of someone who had been in television for decades. "That's what you call being asked difficult questions? That's what you call being held accountable for your actions and statements? No wonder you couldn't hack it as a working royal, if this is how you respond to the slightest bit of scrutiny." The insult hit its mark. Meghan's composure completely shattered, and what came next would become the most talked about moment in morning television history. You bitter old cow, Meghan spat, her finger pointing accusingly at Lorraine. You're just jealous because I had the courage to leave a situation that was killing me, while you've spent your entire career kissing ass and playing it safe. At least I stood up for myself instead of being a pathetic lapdog for the establishment. The studio gasped collectively. Crew members looked around at each other in disbelief, while Lorraine's face went through a range of emotions before settling on something that looked almost like satisfaction. But this war of words was far from over, and what happened next would push this confrontation beyond the point of no return. Lorraine slowly rose from her chair, her movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator sizing up its prey. When she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet, each word delivered with surgical precision. "Did you just call me a bitter old cow?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "And a pathetic lapdog?" The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. "Well, Meghan, let me tell you what I am. I'm someone who's worked every single day for 30 years to get where I am. I didn't marry my way into relevance. I didn't use my family connections to open doors. And I certainly didn't build my career on playing the victim every time someone dared to question me." Meghan's chest was heaving with anger, her perfectly applied makeup beginning to show signs of stress. "You don't know anything about my journey," she shot back, her voice cracking with emotion. "You don't know what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, to have lies written about you in the press every single day." "Oh, spare me," Lorraine laughed coldly. "Lies in the press? You mean like when they reported that you made Catherine cry during the wedding preparations, and you later admitted on international television that actually she made you cry? Or when they said you were difficult to work with, and then we saw a parade of staff members leaving your employment? Which lies are we talking about exactly?" The color completely drained from Meghan's face. She opened her mouth to respond, but Lorraine wasn't finished. "And let's talk about scrutiny, shall we?" Lorraine continued, her voice building in intensity. "You want to know what real scrutiny looks like? It's working your way up from local radio to national television without a safety net. It's being judged on your merit, not your ability to marry well. It's facing criticism for your actual work, not for your carefully crafted victim narrative. You're a fucking disgrace." Meghan exploded, her composure completely obliterated. "You're supposed to be a journalist, but all you're doing is parroting the same hateful rhetoric that drove me out of the UK in the first place. This is exactly why people can't trust the media anymore." "I'm a disgrace?" Lorraine's voice rose to match Meghan's fury. "I'm not the one who went on television and implied that the royal family are racists without providing a shred of evidence. I'm not the one who claimed to have suicidal thoughts and then used that revelation as a weapon against people who couldn't defend themselves. And I'm certainly not the one sitting here throwing a tantrum because someone finally had the balls to call out your bullshit." The audience was riveted, witnessing what would undoubtedly become one of the most infamous moments in television history. Production staff were frantically signaling from the wings, but both women were too locked in their battle to pay any attention. Meghan's voice became shrill with desperation. "You have no idea what you're talking about. I suffered genuine mental health struggles, and you're sitting there making light of it. How dare you question someone's mental health journey?" "I'm not questioning your mental health," Lorraine fired back immediately. "I'm questioning your integrity. I'm questioning your motives. And I'm questioning why every single conversation with you somehow ends up being about how everyone else is wrong and you're the perpetual victim. Do you ever take responsibility for anything, Meghan? Ever?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's mouth opened and closed several times as she struggled to find a response that wouldn't further expose her. But the damage was already done. "This is harassment," she finally managed, her voice now small and defensive. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that—" "No," Lorraine cut her off sharply. "This is accountability. This is what happens when someone finally refuses to let you control the narrative. And clearly, you can't handle it." Meghan grabbed her designer handbag with shaking hands, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. "I'm done with this," she announced, her voice wavering between anger and what sounded suspiciously like tears. "I'm not going to sit here and be attacked by some washed-up presenter who's clearly jealous of my success." "Jealous?" Lorraine let out a genuine laugh. "Of what? Your ability to burn bridges? Your talent for alienating everyone who tries to help you? Your skill at turning every conversation into a pity party? Trust me, love, There's nothing about your life that I envy." That was the final straw. Meghan's face contorted with pure fury as she turned toward the studio exit. "Fuck this, and fuck you," she spat over her shoulder. "You're nothing but a bitter old hack who's never accomplished anything worth remembering. At least I've never had to trade on my royal title to stay relevant," Lorraine called after her, delivering the final devastating blow. Meghan froze at the edge of the studio, her entire body rigid with humiliation. For a moment, it looked like she might turn back for one final verbal assault. But instead, she simply stormed off the set, her heels clicking angrily against the studio floor. The slam of the studio door echoed through the space, followed by absolute silence. Lorraine remained standing, breathing heavily, as the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. Slowly, she turned back to face the camera, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. "Well," she said, smoothing down her blouse and retaking her seat with remarkable composure, "I think that tells you everything you need to know about the Duchess of Sussex." When faced with legitimate questions about her actions and statements, she resorts to personal attacks and storms off like a petulant child. She paused, collecting herself before continuing. "Ladies and gentlemen, that was supposed to be a conversation about accountability and truth. Instead, you witness someone who simply cannot handle being challenged on their behavior. Someone who would rather throw insults and play the victim than engage in honest dialogue." The studio erupted in spontaneous applause from the crew and audience members who had witnessed this extraordinary confrontation. Lorraine nodded graciously, her Scottish dignity intact despite the verbal warfare she had just endured. "Right then," she said with a slight smile. "I think we need a cup of tea after that. When we come back, we'll be talking to someone who actually has something meaningful to contribute to the conversation." As the cameras cut to commercial break, Lorraine Kelly had delivered what would go down as the most satisfying takedown in morning television history, leaving Meghan Markle's carefully constructed public image in tatters and proving that not everyone would bow to the Duchess's manipulative tactics.